So Joe, welcome to The Unmaking. Where are we parked right now and why did you choose this spot?
We are parked down at the outlet. It is, it's magnificent. It's got the mountains, it's got the lake, but Nick and I, before we had kids, lived in a tiny little crib. It's now part of the campground, and I guess it's where we got engaged, so there's sentimental value, but it was also, I guess, the point at which in my life I realised that Wānaka was going to be home. That's generally what happens when you get engaged to a Wānaka boy. So very special spot. We've camped here over the year with our kids, walked the dogs. It's just a very, very special spot.
And did you have a relationship to the outlet, to this spot before you moved in here, or were you relatively new then to the area?
I'd been living in Queenstown and moved over to Wānaka and into the house at the outlet, and it was just waking up every morning with slight elevation as well to this was just magic. And at the time I was commuting over to Gibbston every day, so bit of a schlep, and just that kind of, in the days before North Lake, that final drive along the dirt track was the ultimate kind of like deep breath. Yep, I've left my day behind, and here we are.
It's an interesting spot that this is where the lake changes to the river, which I think is an interesting metaphor as well for you and your life, and this sense of arrival and departure at once, basically.
Yeah, and still waters start flowing, and I think that definitely happened when I moved to Wānaka.
What's the earliest piece of writing you remember being proud of?
Probably my mum and dad in the, I suppose 90s I can't even remember what it was called, but this like bubble jet kind of all-in-one computer and printer, and I decided to write a newspaper. I can't even remember what it was called, but I sat down and I bashed out stories. I must have been probably about 7 or 8. This was kind of pretty modern technology after the massive BBC computers, and I just kind of let loose creatively, and it was fun.
And was that something that you then immediately knew, okay, yeah, this is going to be the thing, or one of the things, or was that kind of there and that was a fun little project as a young girl that you then moved on to other things?
Honestly, it was just a fun project. I went through a phase, of thinking I was going to become a merchant banker. Thank God that didn't last. I didn't really know what to do, but I always enjoyed writing. I did English and French and German at school, and there's a big literature component, and I loved the reading and I loved the writing about the reading. So words have always been important, but yeah, it certainly didn't ever really feature on my radar at that point as a career.
And you grew up on the outskirts or suburbs of London, is that right?
West London, so not bang in the centre, but kind of close enough. Nice and green. Again, kind of probably much like, I think about it, very close to the Thames. My little primary school was right on the river, so, there was always water in my life.
And how were the roles at home divided up between your parents? What was your upbringing like, and how typical was that for that time and for that place?
Yeah, interesting. Both parents worked. Mum retrained to be a doctor in it's when my sister was born, so what's that, kind of probably in her 30s. And kind of went full time when I was about 7. So
from what had she been doing before?
Before that she'd been in publishing, but she I guess there was always there was never any question women worked, and my mum was amazing. She juggled everything. My father's the cook of the family, which probably was less common, and certainly he was and is a very creative cook, and he'd come home at the end of the day, take his jacket and tie off, keep the rest of his suit on and put an apron on. It was kind of like a security blanket, and he was, as I say, still as a very creative cook, but pretty equitable balance. I'd say my mum's definitely the one, if a plug needed rewiring or things like that was definitely her, and so slight role reversal for that time, but didn't seem anything out of the ordinary because that's just what my sister and I knew.
And do you know whether or not this was something they aligned on, or it just happened that way? And did your dad's cooking, did that, was that, hey, you're going to be doing the cooking and that's your job, and then he developed that creativity? Or was it more, hey, I love cooking and this is my thing?
It just happened organically. I mean, when he was at university, I guess that would be in the early mid-60s, would cook for, his friends and sell them their meals. It was early kind of ready meals, I guess, for them. So food's just always been his thing, and it happened completely organically. I've inherited his complete lack of practical abilities. So, thank God for my mother and my sister for that matter.
So you went on then to study English at Oxford. Yeah. Was there a plan in terms of what you were then going to do with that English degree once you'd finished? Absolutely
none at all. It was pure self-indulgence. I read books for 3 years. But again, I think my parents were incredibly supportive, and it was of whatever my sister and I did, and it was very much do what you enjoy and the rest will follow. And it was an absolute gift. I think I probably around my mid-time at Oxford decided that really I was going to kind of pursue food, which was, and probably still is, my first passion. And whether that was going to be catering or restaurant world, I didn't know. I hadn't done any kind of practical experience there, but I think that's where I was headed. And then in my final year, suddenly kind of wine reared its head.
In what form? How did, I understand alcohol and university have a pretty long-standing tradition, but not often so much wine, perhaps.
No, certainly I was never a beer drinker, so wine was on my radar, but the stuff that we drank was not what I drink now. But our bar manager organised a wine tasting with Oddbins, which is a wine shop in the UK. And found out about it one afternoon, dragged my friend down to the college bar, and probably about 8 or 9 of us sitting around being really self-conscious. But this guy was really down to earth, just talked us through wines, and I guess perhaps after the first few tastings we all loosened up a bit, and it was suddenly like, oh my God, this is fascinating, and just the nuances of the wine. I didn't know anything about the kind of practical or technical side of wine, but suddenly just considering wine beyond just, downing it in a glass that's far too big and everything else. It was like, this is interesting.
And did you have what do you call it, like a natural palate for taste? Were you able, when the person leading the tasting is talking about notes and things like that, were you picking up on those?
Yeah, actually I was. And I don't know whether that comes from, again, going back to food and my upbringing. We'd always been so interested not just in what was on our plates, but in terms of the flavours and what had gone into it. So I think that was almost a natural segue into the way in which I kind of approached wine, and just having that kind of instinct, or perhaps I don't know if it's instinctual or whether it's just more of a tendency to think about food and then kind of flavours in that way.
So what came after that then? So you went to a wine tasting, oh my God, this is amazing, this is cool. I think a pivot might be coming up.
Yeah.
What did that look like then?
Well, so it's like, right, how am I going to do this? So in my holidays, I studied for the Wine and Spirit Education Trust exams, which are, as they kind of suggest, exams for the wine trade in the UK. And that gave me a really good grounding, I guess, in regions, the technical aspects. It's real kind of wine 101, but it's essential. Then I decided I was going to finish up at Oxford, go off to South America, learn Spanish, because I'd always wanted to learn Spanish, work in the vines for a year, real kind of, what's the word? Idealistic look at things. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. But actually then what happened was a friend of mine who was slightly more assiduous when it came to actually thinking about careers after Oxford, saw in the careers newsletter that there was a London-based wine company that was looking for someone to join them, who could speak French. And so I applied in a kind of slightly half-hearted way, but somehow, possibly more by good luck than good management, got the job. And very soon after started working in London for a French wine importer.
And how did that reality, because you had a different thing in your head in terms of the romance of South America and being there with the dirt and the soil and everything else going on, to then actually, did that feel like a plan B then, or okay, this didn't quite work out like I was hoping for, or did that enthusiasm, were you able to quite quickly go, oh, actually no, this is really interesting, what I've actually stumbled into perhaps?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is, with the great kind of South America dream, I hadn't actually got that far in my thinking. I mean, I'd just started kind of throwing this out there as an idea. So I think if I'd gone too far down that route, perhaps this would have felt like a bit of a compromise. But as it was brilliant. And it opened my eyes to exactly that, the trade. And actually I didn't stick in the job that long in the event. After 4 or 5 months, it's like, right, well, I can read about vines and pruning and these things till I'm blue in the face, but I think until I actually stand in a vineyard, it's not going to make sense. So I kind of did a 4-month stint, and I had a lot of family and friends kind of saying like, not really a good look to be leaving your first job after 4 months. But I did it, and came out to New Zealand, and that really, it was like that final piece in the jigsaw falling into place. Like my first day in a vineyard, I was like, oh, now I get it. I've been reading all these textbooks in a classroom in London, but actually being there was brilliant. And then further down the line, those 4 months stood me in excellent stead when it came to understanding what comes after the vineyard and the winery. The
whole macro view of the industry.
And so it's almost back to front, because most people kind of perhaps start in the vineyard or the winery and then might see the business side, but actually, I don't think there was anything wrong with the way in which I did it.
So, what was the level of preparation like before coming to New Zealand? Was there blanket email bombs of every vineyard in New Zealand? Were you very selective? Did you just rock up here and try and figure things out once you arrived, or what did that look like?
All of the above. Yeah. Well, there's Kiwi Master of Wine, who's now back here, but at the time he was the wine buyer for Marks and Spencer's, Sam Harrop, and I was working kind of with him in the UK, and I told him my plan. Now at that stage, again, it was a bit like the South America idea of like, I'm just going to go off and do something. The only place I really knew of in New Zealand was Marlborough, and so I said to Sam, I'm going to go to Marlborough, and I was 22, 23 at the time. And Sam, bless him, said, do not go to Marlborough. You will go mad. Central Otago is a really exciting place. Queenstown's a great place for you to go and meet people, whatever else. And I mean, I will be eternally grateful to Sam, as he knows, for that advice. So once I kind of honed in on Central Otago, I did a whole load of reading, which in those days really was actually getting the books and reading what, Jancis Robinson and other kind of wine commentators had to say. And then kind of to your original question, yes, I did the blanket emails of, hi, this is who I am. Have you got anything? And a lot of it was met with dead air. A lot of people came back and just like, look, we're really small, because, this is going back 23 years when, a lot of these wineries were real kind of 1-person, 2-person operations, and they just simply didn't have the space or the capacity for someone else. But I got some positive responses, a lot of, get in touch. When you're out here, and then got a super positive response from Alan Brady, who was one of the founders, I guess, of the Central Otago wine industry, along with my parents-in-law and various others. And he basically was like, look, I can't give you a job, but, you sound like good news. I don't know what I wrote. Come out here, I'll meet you, I'll show you around and get you some introductions. And that really then kind of, I guess, was the start of my Central Otago life.
Did you have a clear understanding then of what you had to offer, or was it purely the other way around? Hey, I'm looking for a job.
Yeah, I'm looking for a job.
Yeah.
And I was looking for anything. My first job was at Gibson Valley. Well, no, my very first job was working for Grant Taylor in the vineyards, kind of in looking after his baby vines and being shown what to do. And again, that was one of those jigsaw moments of like, oh, this is what a baby vine looks like, and this is what we're doing and why, and oh yes, no, I remember that. And then I got to work in the cellar door at Gibson Valley, so doing wine tastings, and I think I was definitely learning on the job, because I was having to be the voice of authority to all these people some of whom had probably been in New Zealand longer than I had at that point. But people were very generous with their time, with their knowledge, and I think I went in with an open mind and a lot of curiosity. And a lot of people working in cellar doors are often just travelling, and it's a working holiday visa job. But I went in saying, this is what I want to do, and I want to learn. And people were unbelievably generous.
Was that when you met Nick then, when you first moved to Central Otago, or how long had you been here before you guys met?
Well, we met in passing my first weekend. So thanks to Alan, I volunteered at the Central Otago Pinot Noir celebration, which was the most incredible opportunity and, again, introduction to the wine world. And some bloke called Nick Mills had left his diary lying on the ground. This was the shape of the decades to come, me cleaning up after him. But no, we then met properly kind of a couple of months later at kind of a wine tasting and stuff. But kind of got together later in the year, actually, in London. But he was on the radar.
Gotcha. And then just a couple of years later, I think you had quite a big year that involved splitting up, moving to France to work on the harvest, and then by the end of the year you were back here and were engaged and moving in at the outlet. So what was going on in that year?
That was like 21 years ago, and it feels like yesterday looking out there. So I guess 2005, I'd been here a couple of years. A slight order change. I went to Burgundy first, so did vintage over there, and I guess it was amazing. I mean, Burgundy is the kind of seen as this kind of sacred home of Pinot Noir, and I had a wonderful time. I was living in France. I was just seeing a whole other world, and I guess I was at that point with where I was then at Mount Edward, and just, I guess, age 25 of what am I going to do next. And it was just wonderful being back in France and being immersed in the kind of culture, and I think the kind of romance of doing harvest, it kind of seems a bit different. It's almost like a working holiday in itself. But I decided I was going to leave New Zealand, which meant leaving Nick, move back to France, live in Burgundy, be close to my family. So came back, left Nick, left my job at Mount Edward, packed up all my stuff, and then was staying with Grant Taylor, our winemaker friend over in Queenstown, and just had a kind of slight, oh my God, what am I doing moment? And thankfully it wasn't too late. And next day I'm back here, and Nick kind of says, I love you, will you marry me? And I was like, oh yes. And I was like, oh, does that mean we're engaged? And I think he thought he might kind of get down on one knee or something else, but it was all kind of, in its way, very romantic in the kitchen of our little cottage up there.
Tremendously romantic. As I said to you before, I think this is definitely mini-series ripe in terms of in thinking about the BBCs and Britain's fascination with Australia and New Zealand. And,
everyone loves a good love story. I'm not sure who would cast, but that's another story.
Yeah. So that was then, you then came into an amazing Wānaka dynasty in many ways. And pretty soon after, then to Lois Mills, formidable matriarch of the family, offered you her job.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I imagine there was a lot of weight with that. What did that feel like at the time? Was that, and looking back now, often you have that sort of youthful confidence, perhaps.
Yeah.
That looking back with the benefit of a little more wisdom and maturity, you think, holy shit, I really didn't know what I was doing, or what was that like for you?
Exactly that. I think at the time I just went in. I wouldn't say guns a-blazing, because you're absolutely right. There's huge pressure when you're joining a family business, when it's not your family, and when you are being handed the reins by someone like Lois, who created the business that is Ripon. She and Rolf planted the vineyard, but she was the one who, as the wine was piling up in the garage, kind of said to Rolf, we actually need to sell this stuff, and created a business model to do that. So there was a tremendous amount of weight. So I trod lightly, but like you say, there was the youthful confidence of, you know, I think I've got this. Whereas actually I was just completely winging it. And I look back now and just think, gosh, you know, again, possibly more by good luck than good management, we got through it. But we were very small operation then. I mean, Nick and I were working in an office within Lois's house. It was just the two of us in the office. We had a vineyard manager, and we had an assistant winemaker, and then we had seasonal staff. So it's a far cry from where kind of Ripon is now. And so it was a very simple time. But yeah, it was, there was definitely weight, and not just, you know, taking over from my mother-in-law, but again, understanding that this is a family business. You know, I'm living and working alongside my fiance, then husband. And, you know, we were working all the hours God gave us to kind of get things going, but also understanding there were other family members, some of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't, and just really wanting to do right by them as much by ripping the farm.
How detailed or specific was the briefing then around expectation management? Hey, you know, you're joining the business. This is what we're hoping, expecting you to achieve, and also for you in terms of how, was there any alignment, or it was just, oh, okay, I've got this job now and crack into it? And it's like,
no, I mean, there
in.
was no job description, because other than the production side, I was that. We did have someone who looked after the cellar door on a part-time basis, but you know, I was payroll, I was accounts, I was bookkeeping, I was sales and exports. I did it all. So it was really just trying to work out, you know, what needed to be done, when and how I could kind of slot it in the day, because yeah, that's just what you did.
And what's one of the things that you had to learn fast that you perhaps didn't know beforehand, before you started that role, in terms of the responsibilities, or just how you were going to actually make this work as a couple or for you individually?
I mean, I think at a very practical level, cash flow, and certainly understanding markets, wine markets. You know, I did, while I'd cut my teeth in the wine industry in the UK, it was for a very short period, but it wasn't at the coalface of, we've produced this, now we need to sell it. It was the other end, and understanding how, say, at the cellar door, you can command your greatest, you know, your highest price point. And certainly back in those days, you sometimes only sold one bottle a day, versus selling at export, where you're selling at your lowest price point. You have to wait several months for payment, but you sell a pallet of wine at the time. So there was no model for that. I mean, we had, Lois and Nick had established existing markets. We needed to grow, but it was also just managing that cash flow and understanding that you can't always control who's going to be ordering when. And certainly as we went forward kind of a couple more years, you know, 2008 and the GFC, that became all the more critical, and just trying to navigate that as best as we could, while understanding some of it was beyond our control. And
did you try and have a mix then, in terms of, okay, you got, you know, local cellar door, export, wholesale,
Absolutely.
kind of do everything, or is there a sweet spot or a recipe for the industry where you go, hey, you want to be able to get, you know, ideally you've got at least 60% of your sales are going cellar door, because that's where your margins are the greatest, or is there a recipe like that?
There isn't, no. Everyone has their own recipe, depending on their model, depending on their size. I mean, you look at someone like Felton Road, who's done extraordinarily well in really building up a private client base, which is fantastic. We've always had a pretty broad mix, and I'd say that served us very well. Certainly things like when it came to COVID, you know, we didn't have all our eggs in one basket. There are tales of some wineries and probably other industries where they were so reliant upon one particular market or market share that things got particularly hard. I mean, it was still hard, but we had backstops. So it was, and there's constant adjustment. And the other thing I learned, of course, is that there are some wines where you're actually wanting to sell them entirely, say at the cellar door, whereas there are other ones that you might export. So even within your overall picture, it's like you've then got to consider each wine almost separately as well. So it was a lot, but it was fun, you know, and just kind of trying to work that out and then tweaking things, and I loved that.
the fun parts for sure, but I also imagine there were a lot of parts that weren't a lot of fun. And in terms of looking at your typical day, I imagine there are days that you say, okay, this is a normal day or relatively low key, lots of admin kind of thing. I imagine they would be pretty much in the minority. A lot of days where it's all hands to the pump, and this is the seasonal busy time or busy period, and it's mad. But then you've also got things like global financial crisis, frosts, other bits and pieces to deal with. What were the down points for you in terms of trying to work through that role and being confronted with those new things? It's just, okay, there's no template for, this is what we did last year, or this is what you do in this situation. This is new.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were those moments, but quite genuinely, having Nick in those moments, working so closely and so well with Nick was brilliant, because I had someone to whom I could turn and to whom he could turn and say, how are we going to work this out? Obviously things like the GFC, when suddenly export markets in particular became very hard. The years when we did get frosted, as you mentioned, they were all challenging, and there'd be moments where you'd be like, oh my God, what are we going to do? But generally, whoever was having that panic, the other one would be like, hang on, let's just take a deep breath. And if we couldn't see the woods for the trees, there were other people within the industry, friends and colleagues to whom we could turn. And again, that's what's so incredible about the Central Otago wine industry, is that kind of support in those moments of like, shit, knowing that there's someone who's either going through it, or who's gone through it, or who at least can look at it with kind of a bit more kind of, I guess, subjectivity.
And has that always been the case down here in terms of the way that the various vintners have operated together?
Absolutely. Yeah, vintners, wine growers. Yeah. I mean, and people are always really struck by that. And I would say that is one of the core strengths of Central Otago. I mean, obviously, I'm unapologetically biased, but when Rolf and Lois, when Annie Pinkney, the Grants in Alexandra, Alan Brady, when they first started growing grapes down here, no one thought it was going to work. Only Annie Pinkney, who had a vineyard kind of in between Arrowtown and Queenstown, she was the only one with any kind of formal viticultural training. So everyone helped each other. Everyone shared their knowledge. The first wines were Central Otago wines rather than, say, Gibbsden Valley, Ripon, whatever else. They crushed the grapes together, made the wines together. So that early spirit, by necessity, of kind of camaraderie and support and collaboration has lasted, because what's really lovely is a lot of those early winemakers, and I say winemakers because they were trained as such, Rob Hay at Chard Farm, Grant Taylor, who now has Valley, they came in to work for those early companies, and they then went on to form their own wineries within the region, so they kind of carried that spirit with them. And even though, we've got big multinationals, we've got LVMH with Cloudy Bay, we've got Rothschild, even though we've got those big companies, that collaboration and that kind of support really does still remain, and it's wonderful.
That's still there. 'Cause I wondered that, because I know there's a lot of diversification over the last, I guess, 5-10 years, and a lot of new owners, foreign investors and things like that maybe have a different way of doing business, or different morals or ethics when it comes to particularly competition. So that hasn't changed. That's still there.
No, I mean, I think there's always an element of, obviously, if there's only going to be one Central Otago wine on a wine list, you want it to be your own. But someone else's success is success for the region. And I think, I might now have the statistics wrong, but roughly, I believe it's something like 7% of New Zealand's production is from Central Otago. And New Zealand forms roughly about the same 7% of the world's wine production. So in the grand scheme of things, we are tiny, and yet our reputation punches well above our weight. And that really does come from, I think, that kind of celebration of one another, rather than kind of glancing over your shoulder, kind of going, grr, they're the ones who got the gold or the 89, 90 points, whatever it is,
I imagine then Ripon would have been a business that would have been extremely hard hit by COVID, and particularly around the uncertainty and what's coming. What was that first year like for you guys of COVID, when that was 2020?
The very first thing, of course, was, are we actually going to be able to pick the grapes? Because we went into lockdown, March 26th, something like that. Central Otago is the last region in New Zealand to pick, and we were considered to be an essential industry. There was a lot of kickback because of that from other industry. Why should they be allowed to pick? And that's understandable. And we had to do a lot of paperwork, to submit to kind of, show that we were going to kind of play by the rules.
Was it based on export value in terms of that? Why you were an essential export earnings?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And so we were extremely nervous because there were all eyes on the wine industry, and at that point, it was such early days, and I think we forget now quite how little we knew and how carefully, understandably, everyone was playing, taking things. So for us, we were just keeping our fingers crossed that everyone up in Marlborough, everyone up in North Canterbury, kind of as you work your way south through the harvest, was playing by the book, because we could not risk not picking our grapes. But it was actually quite a late harvest anyway, and so that kind of lockdown period, we had a good 2 weeks to put plans together to work out how we were going to run the harvest. We basically had parallel teams. Nick ran one, his assistant winemaker ran the other, which is not how we generally operate, but we got through. So that was the kind of, I guess, practical side of it. But then it was like, well, what does this mean? Obviously we had events booked, and, that were having to be cancelled and then rebooked and then rebooked again and rebooked again. And that was extremely hard and extremely stressful for our events manager, who handled it with kind of a grace and a calm that I can't even begin to imagine. But then going back to your earlier question, in terms of wine sales, we were very fortunate because a lot of our overseas markets, our UK distributor, for example, has a retail arm as well as selling to restaurants, as well as selling to corporates. So while the restaurant arm of their sales kind of fell off, they saw a huge boost in their retail arm. So actually overseas, and we saw that in other markets as well, overseas people were buying wine to drink at home because they didn't have anything else to do.
Probably a bit more than they had been recently.
Yeah, but it was really hard. And I would spend days like sending newsletters and, while not wanting to sound desperate, nor indeed discount our wines too heavily, because if you go down the discount route, how do you claw your way back? But just trying to find any avenue possible. Going back through emails, going back 4 or 5 years to anyone who'd ever expressed interest in our wines to just sell. And it worked. We got through in the first instance, but those years were very, very tough. And of course the cellar door closed, and when it reopened, we were very limited to how many people we could host and things like that. So it was a period of adjustment, and then readjustment, and then readjustment again. But we did make it through, but it was hard.
And was that when you first started thinking about stepping back, or had you already thought about that and already started that process pre-COVID?
It kind of occasionally cropped up from time to time. Partly, I think, just thinking that perhaps Nick and I needed to kind of create greater separation between our home and work lives. And I think also just thinking that perhaps, I don't want to sound like kind of Pollyanna-ish, but that, I've been there. By the time I left Ripon in 2021, I'd been there, the greater part of 16 years. And it was like, well, probably time for someone new to come in, for some fresh blood. Obviously in other roles we had kind of people coming in quite routinely. But the market was changing, the Central Otago landscape, as you've mentioned, these bigger wineries were coming in. It was like, well, it's perhaps time for someone else to come in. But as I say, it wasn't entirely selfless, because I was ready to think about something else. And certainly I think in that kind of COVID era, like so many, I was like, right, well, what next?
And so you resigned, registered The Right Path, the name of your new venture, and then second lockdown.
Yeah. Right?
Exactly. Sort of like within a day or something. Yes.
I think it was. Perfect. Yeah. I left Ripon on the Friday. On the Monday, I kind of tidied up the office, registered The Right Path, came up with the name The Right Path, registered The Right Path. And by the end of that day, I think, the Wednesday lockdown was announced. So it was like, right, okay.
So that would have been an interesting week, I'm assuming, in your household in terms of hearing that news and then dealing with that, and then what does that mean? And so you can still relate and talk about what's going on at the vineyard, but it's still also then slightly different now, right? For you guys in terms of discussing that topic. And was that something that, okay, I'm no longer working there, but we can still talk about this at home, or how do you navigate that then?
Yeah, I mean, I'd had quite a long notice period. In the end, from the moment I decided to leave to the moment I actually kind of walked out the door, it was 5 months. So there'd been kind of quite a lot of handover. But even so, I was always going to be available for any questions. Again, after you've been there for almost 16 years, there's always going to be those random, how do you do this questions? So I was still pretty available. And I was also, at that point, still a director of Ripon. So we're having to kind of look at things very much from a governance level and what the implications of another lockdown could mean. But yeah, it was, I think for me at least, I was definitely still a sounding board, and yes, still answering emails and phone calls from team members. But I think knowing that actually I was no longer on the Ripon payroll and everything else, it was like, okay, I can just breathe a bit, be a bit more present for the boys, and and hopefully be more of a support for Nick.
And how was it then finding those first few clients, then starting out being self-employed suddenly? How was that in terms of getting out there acquiring clients?
Well, actually, to be honest, the way it rather went is I had, having said I wasn't on Ripon's payroll anymore, I'd over the years stacked up a lot of holiday pay. So that gave me a little bit of a buffer while I kind of worked out what was happening. And in those first months, it was very much word of mouth, just me trying to work out what I was actually offering. Because again, it was a bit like all these things in my life. I kind of have this great idea and then don't really think it through. So it was just doing kind of little bits of writing for kind of some local businesses, beginning to think about whether I needed to apply for a part-time job as well, or whether I should apply for a full-time job and have the right path as kind of some background noise if it was going to become something in the future. And I didn't really quite know yet what that was going to look like. I did apply for a job which obviously I didn't get, with an amazing organisation called Garden to Table. And I think if I had got that, then perhaps the right path wouldn't have really kind of come to fruition. But all things to the best, because kind of with events that happened in our family the following year, it was just as well that actually I hadn't got too much in place.
This is then Toby's mountain biking accident,
Yeah.
I'm assuming. I'm sure days like that are burnt into any mother's memory, and that you never forget it. What happened that day? What was going on? Where were you? It's totally burned in memory. It was that beautiful. It was 2022, and we had that Indian summer. It just went on, and it was a beautiful day. And actually, I had hilarious. I had applied for a job and got a phone call that day saying, "Would you be interested in coming for interview?" And then the next phone call, I was in ICU. So, but yeah, it was just kind of another day, really, pottering around. And then towards the end of the day, kind of about 3:30, got a phone call from a number I didn't recognise. And I would always recommend everyone, we all ignore phone numbers if we don't recognise them. Whenever anyone I see does that, I'm like, just answer it. You don't know who it might be. Because I'm glad I did answer it, because it was a man who had found Toby unable to move at Lismore Park, and telling me an ambulance was on the way. So that was 17th of March 2022. So what was your move then? To Lismore Park, to meet at the hospital where Burwood were helicopter? Yeah. What was happening? Straight to Lismore, leaving my other child, Ford, my other son, at home, kind of not really knowing what was going on, kind of calling Nick, going, "Hi, can you talk?" He's like, "I'm on the top of a tank." I was like, "Okay, so Toby's had an accident." He's like, "Okay, I'm on my way." So kind of panic calls, but went to Lismore where St John's were arriving, and they were unbelievable, knowing exactly what to do. Because it was clearly some kind of spinal injury. The helicopter went to Christchurch, which is standard practice. Doesn't always happen. Fortunately, it did.
I was in the helicopter with Nick, Ford and... I was in the helicopter with Toby. Nick and Ford drove up to Christchurch with a friend. And then once we got to Christchurch, it's slightly a blur in as much as it's just all people around Toby. He was put into surgery that night, 11 days in ICU, and then transferred to Burwood's spinal unit for the next 6 odd months.
Which involved then you guys, Ronald McDonald Housing, staying with friends, tag teaming, you're up there, then you're back down here, Nick's up there. How did you manage then that period?
Ronald McDonald House, and then Burwood has units, family units, and although they were still in COVID lockdowns, they actually opened one up for us because Toby was only 13 at the time, and they don't normally take children that young, so they were like, yeah, you need to have a parent nearby. Honestly, looking back, it was kind of really easy because there was this, like I've said this before, kind of a clarity of purpose. It was like when I was in Christchurch, the focus was Toby. When I was down here, the focus was Ford, and the same for Nick. I mean, it was harder for Nick because Nick was also having to try and deal with harvest from afar, and I mean, absolute testament to the team that we had at Ripon, that they could kind of run harvests with Nick more absent than not. But it was tough. Nick and I were shipped in the night for half a year, but you knew where you needed to be, and I knew what my role was. So then going back to the whole thing about the right path, thank goodness actually that it hadn't really taken off, and thank goodness that I had left Ripon when I did, because working just wasn't really going to be in the equation for me.
And what about planning then at that sort of point? How concrete are the prognoses around, okay, he's going to be in here for this period of time and then go here and this is what it's going to look like? Or was this kind of, hey, this is kind of open-ended for quite a long time? How did you guys manage that then in terms of that uncertainty before things got, okay, it's another 6 weeks and then this is going to happen, or here are the milestones? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think we knew from the outset it was going to be a few months. But, then kind of the longer they wanted to keep him, almost the better, because it showed that they felt there was more that could be done there in terms of rehabilitation with the physio team, with the OTs, whatever. Had it been like, yep, you're going to be here 2 months and then you're on your way, that was clearly their feeling that they had done what they could and now it's time to get back to your world. But really, in terms of planning or whatever else, you just took every day as it came. And in terms of progress, it was like, okay, if this is all the progress that's ever going to be made today, then that's what we work with. So, and Toby did continue to progress, but at every step you didn't overly project, because it's kind of there is no kind of crystal ball gazing.
How did he handle that then at that time? Was that something that he was he frustrated with himself that he felt he got unlucky, or he did something stupid, or this is a trick that he's done heaps of times before? Or how did he then deal with the injury and the aftermath of that?
With the most astonishing kind of poise and grace that I've ever seen. It was, I can't speak for Toby, but I never saw any moments of self-pity. He will often say that Burwood was, he had a great time. He was a 13-year-old, he didn't have to go to school, he was, almost like the mascot of the unit. And the wonderful thing about Burwood Spinal Unit is it is a rehabilitation centre, so it's not like ICU where people are coming in and out and you never see who's in the room next to you. You do actually get to know those people around, and you get to know the nurses, and everyone's again kind of celebrating each other's gains, whatever that might look like given the injury. So he just got on with it. There were days when obviously you could tell he just wasn't into going to the gym, going to rehab, whatever, but he understood that this, those months there were in a way a gift with the best spinal physiotherapists or whatever else, and he knuckled down. I mean, he's always had a competitive spirit. He's just like his father. And so I think in that respect, it was like, yeah, you can't do this. Yeah, I can. Yeah.
What did you learn about the local community during that period?
I mean, I can't talk highly enough about the local community in that period. I mean, one of the things that astonished me was, you know, how quickly the Bush Telegraph kicked in. I mean, by the time we were in Christchurch, people knew what was going on. But there was never anything ghoulish about it. Everyone just wanted to help, and that might have been cooking meals for Ford, or, you know, I mean, Toby's godmother, who's a great friend of ours, basically, I mean, was astonishing and moved into our house and lived with Ford. And you know, that time when Nick and I were up in ICU with Toby, and people would drop off baking for Ford's lunchbox, or cook suppers, or offer to, you know, to do the ferrying around. People stacked our wood, made us a new wood box, picked our quinces. We were sent care packages in Christchurch from people we'd never met. And there were kindnesses that just kind of came out of the blue. Two local boys, a couple of years older, a few years older than Toby, who were competitive cyclists, road cyclists, won a race and kind of sent up the shirt that they got to Toby. Like, it's really small things, but it's like people are thinking of us, and it was astonishing.
Is there advice you'd give then to others, perhaps in a future situation where something happens to somebody they know within the community? Because that's the thing, it's often quite difficult. You want to do something, you want to help, you don't really know, don't know what to say, don't know what to do maybe. A lot of people struggle with that. Well, having lived through that, what advice would you give people then?
Good question. I kind of don't know in a way, because I was on the receiving end of it. And I know a lot of people did find getting in touch hard, or knowing how to. I think I can't speak for other people in other situations, but even just a message and not expecting a reply, you know, just that, so sorry, or whatever else. And I think, and maybe this is just me, but not skirting around the issue. You know, you could sometimes see that people did feel a bit awkward, or I'd often get what I used to call the Princess Diana eyes, which is the looking out from under the eyelash going, hi.
Oh, okay, yes, yeah.
It's just like, let's just face this head on. This has happened, and don't shy away from it. But that's me. Other people might, you know, in another situation, and perhaps we're not being guided by how Toby and Ford were handling it, might have been I wanted to shy away and be like, I don't want to talk to anyone. So it's a bit of a tricky one to answer.
And on the first day Toby goes back to school, you start your first paid contract. You didn't feel the need to take a little break, maybe?
I was ready. I needed to. And so that was working with the Wānaka Festival of Colour. It was a whole new team. They knew my circumstances. They were incredibly supportive. It was a contract in as much as I had a task to deliver. You know, I had to deliver the publicity for the Festival of Colour. So there was flexibility in terms of my hours, my days, whatever else. Yeah, I was ready. I was ready to use my brain, you know, to something other than dealing with ACC or whatever else. And it was fabulous.
Your tagline is effective communication the human way. So we're obviously in a pretty AI disrupted phase right now. I'm assuming this is not a coincidence that there's the mention of human in your strapline. What role is that doing for you? What are you trying to?
Well, it's funny you mention that, actually, because that's been the kind of strapline from the get-go, and that was before kind of OpenAI kind of hit us with ChatGPT, and we were like, what is this? So maybe I was ahead of my time on that. But I think, AI is obviously my biggest competitor. But, you know, I've been shown that's also, there are opportunities there as well. So we can't run away from AI, you know, and it's how do we work alongside it? And certainly as a writer, how do I position myself as an attractive alternative or complement to AI? And so hopefully by, you know, really having a distinctive voice and being kind of willing to work with others with theirs, you know, that's going to help me.
And speaking of humans, you also made the admirable decision to work with a human designer when designing your visual identity. What did that process teach you about your own business and also about the value of design?
Oh, it was brilliant, actually. I was working with a woman called Jackie Taylor, who's got a business called Reservoir Design, and she, sends a little questionnaire about, basically who are you and what is your business. And kind of, as I said, I created the name, The Right Path, the day I left Ripon, and it was like, yep, this sounds good, I'm going to register it. And then I hadn't given any thought to anything else in those first jobs, where, as I said, kind of word of mouth, it was just invoices with no logo, whatever else. So this was a really good moment of just like, yeah, who am I? What am I? And just working through that process was invaluable, because I don't think we pose those questions of ourselves. I think sometimes you do need someone else to put that to you, and having that moment of kind of professional introspection was absolutely invaluable.
You call yourself, I think, a parrot for picking up a brand's voice. Without mentioning any names, has there been a brand or a sector that you've gone, well, this is a real stretch in terms of to get that tonality right?
No. I mean, sometimes it's been a bit of a challenge, but I enjoy that. So, there might have been a couple of kind of full starts sitting at the desk going, how am I going to do this? But so far, no. But to date, I've been very fortunate, certainly kind of, I'd say, with local businesses, the people who kind of seem interested in what I offer are, businesses, organisations, industry with whom I kind of feel some kind of natural affinity. And certainly if they're the Wānaka-based ones, we've got that kind of shared value of actually being here. And that often, I think, with businesses here lies at the heart of their identity. So not yet. There are some jobs, there is some work that I do that is challenging in other ways, but in terms of finding that voice, not yet.
And what's your process for moving between different projects? Do you need a buffer between each? So, for example, because they are different voices and also quite, so whether it's a festival press release or an EU tender or something else for a local business, for some copy for social media or a website, do you have a set process, or can you just basically go, oh, that's done, and then immediately roll on to the next thing? How do you work?
I generally just jump, and I really like that, because again, it's like, right, switch the brain. I think going back to university, I had to churn out, I was talking to my tutor about this relatively recently, which is why it's in my brain. I had to churn out 4,000 word essays a week. So you'd be doing 1 minute, you'd be doing John Milton, the next minute, boom, do that, switch to Shakespeare, switch to Virginia Woolf, whoever it is. The reason I kind of go back to university is I think that has been the most invaluable training for me in many ways. Of you do something, you move to the next thing, and then you might have to go back to the first thing, and that's fine. But just I love that. I love the way I have to switch my brain into another mode from, as you say, it might be something like an EU tender to a festival brief to a real estate copy, whatever it is.
Can you listen to music while you're writing, while you're working? Does music have a role for you? Or is that something that you say, hey, no, this is music comes later, or so long as there's no lyrics? How do you approach that? No,
music comes later, actually. Music's a huge part of my world, my life. But to use the terminology that my children use, when I'm in there, I just lock in. And it's just very much about sitting down, no noise, and into it.
Where do you go to do your thinking these days?
Mountain, a lot of the time. I walk. I find it both incredibly therapeutic and meditative, but also inspirational for me in terms of creating those moments of inspiration. So actually sometimes if I am in a bit of a rut, whether it's what am I going to do next, how am I going to stay afloat professionally, or how am I going to approach this particular task, rather than plugging into a podcast, which is my other modus operandi on Mount Iron. It's I'll just go for a walk and just not even really focus on it, and then just let those thoughts come.
And so moving, then, that's important for you to be moving at the same time. You're not a sit and look at the view and think person, or sit and look out the window and think. It's like, you're doing things, you're moving.
And, moving.
What's the piece of work that you're proudest of from the last 4 years?
Ooh, there was a very personal piece that I wrote. It was about wine. I was given a really open-ended brief, which was a lot of fun. There's a podcast called the Not So Serious Wine Chats, and actually this speaks to what we've just talked about, the kind of movement. I was asked to write a piece about anything really to do with wine, and that was fun to do in itself, because obviously I'm not entrenched in the day-to-day of wine anymore. And I just took myself off for a walk. I actually went up to Diamond Lake and didn't really think too much about anything, and I was walking down and I was like, yeah, right, and then I just had the idea. So, and by the time I got home, it was almost fully formed, and it was really just a piece about what wine means to me, and the place it plays in my life. And it was about those moments when you're with friends and you're listening to, I think I probably said Neil Young, and it's just, you're not necessarily drinking the best wine you've ever had, but it's all about the context and the people you're with. And it was a very personal piece, and I was pretty nervous sending it out into the world for that reason, but it seemed to have landed, and people said nice things. And I'm always, it's funny, I spend my life writing for other people, and I think obviously the bits I'm most uncomfortable about, the bits I'm most nervous about, are when it's actually, me and my own words.
Is that something you think is an itch that's there needing to be scratched, that will get itchier with time, or it's just there, you're aware of it, whatever, you might do something with it?
I think I'm aware of it. I don't really feel any need to explore it further. I've got a friend who kind of asked me once, what my novel is, and I said, what do you mean? And she said, oh, everyone's got a novel in them. And I was like, actually, I don't think I do. Occasionally I think it'd be quite fun to, God, I feel kind of presumptuous even putting my, talking about this with her name, but like Nora Ephron, or someone who wrote wonderful essays and little vignettes, I'd love to perhaps write little things like that. So just kind of snippets or ideas or observations. But for now I'm just happy to help other people find their voice, really, which again is not selfless. It's my job, but I think it's also kind of perhaps a defense mechanism. I'm not writing myself.
Has your relationship to land changed since moving here and marrying into the Mills family and Ripon? And I think you talked about how it's hard to know where sort of Nick's body ends or if his feet ends in the soil of Ripon begin, kind of thing. Seeing your kids growing up in that environment, have it for them, every day. You've come into it obviously as an outsider, quasi, partly formed, rather than them growing up into it. How has that experience then changed your relationship to land as an Englishwoman?
Hugely. I never really had any concept of it before I came here, and I, absolutely, to Nick is, inextricably linked to Ripon and Ripon to Nick, and I think it's one of the things that he and his family espouse is this idea of guardianship, that we are not owners of a piece of land. And I'm from London. We owned a house, next door someone else owned a house, but actually, just seeing this bit of land that they are just farming to look after, and to secure for the next generation, and to realise this idea that Nick has of realising a land's potential, so it being land first rather than people first, and that was so striking, and obviously informed my work at Ripon for as I say, for almost 16 years, but certainly how I look at where we are now. And looking out the outlet here, just this idea of what we're doing should be looking after the land, whatever that piece of land means to you, whether it is your acre block or whether it's where you walk every day. It's this idea that we we need to tread lightly, but also have this idea of being a guardian.
So family businesses are all encompassing, all consuming. A blessing or a curse, depending on your view, depending on the business, depending on your personality. How do you look at that for your own children? Is this something that you'd say, hey, whatever they want to do, they should follow that, or hey, this is such a hard industry? As interesting and as exciting, as appealing as it is, I would actually prefer that they went off and did something else. Or how do you approach
I think they're sufficiently strong-willed that they'll do what they will. But I think what growing up in this environment with family members who work together, where there are both, tensions and harmony, is seeing how extraordinary, and I think even they realise how unique it is to work to this kind of collective purpose with that emotional and generational investment. So whether they and their cousins and everything else become part of that, it's always going to be in their DNA, and I think that Nick is is a man full of integrity, and his values have no doubt been transferred to our sons. And I'd like to think that wherever their professional lives go, that they will carry those values with them, even if it doesn't end up within a family business.
I know that you're a very keen conserver of fruit. What does cooking give you that work and wine and other things in your life, writing can't give you?
It's my anchor. It's what my father had. It's comfort, it's security. I mean, going back to the Burwood days, we cooked for Toby every single day. That's what we could do. It nurtured him, it nourished him, it helped him heal. When I was in Wānaka, I was just doing the same with Ford. It was just, this is what the boys have always known. This is what I grew up with. The sounds and the smells of Dad in the kitchen, and I found that hugely comforting over the years, and certainly when I go home it's so familiar, and that's what the boys kind of identify with. So for me, it's food is home, food is love, food is comfort, food is stress relief. Cooking, I should say, not necessarily food. When food's stress relief, that can be a bit more problematic, but certainly providing food and cooking is a kind of core, at my core.
Is that every time you cook, or is that, okay, no, it's like Monday to Friday, it's about getting shit done and getting stuff out the door, and then Saturday and Sunday, maybe take a little bit of time and make a special trip to the market and pick something out? Or
I think, let's not sugarcoat this. There are certainly days where it's like, what am I going to do? And it's like, grab a bag of ravioli at the supermarket and, grate some parmesan and hope for the best. But, I think one of the things we've started doing with the boys is at the start of every week, it's like, right, you guys can help me with the menus. I've got a boy who's going off to university next year. I want him to kind of become a bit more self-sufficient. So there's, again, that collective thing at the start of each week where all, even if I'm the one who does most of the cooking, we're all thinking about how we're going to, eat for the week. And yes, of course, kind of Monday to Friday, it is perhaps, less considered, less time, it's definitely about efficiencies, but it might be that I find myself with a bit more time and I'll make an apple crumble or whatever else and just throw something extra in. And I mean, the boys and Nick are incredibly appreciative, so I guess that kind of pushes me a bit more of like, oh, what treats can I do for them today?
So Toby's going to university. Yeah. He's the one. Has he got a good spag bol in his repertoire yet? Because I think that's all you need, isn't it?
Well, we've had this conversation. Is you need a mince recipe. You need a good pasta recipe. He's got good toasty game. I'm not sure what else. Ford, his younger brother, is amazing when it comes to flavours and instincts. So I'm kind of less worried about him, and he's got a few more years up his sleeve. But I don't know. Toby will probably just live off kebabs and chips.
How important a role does skiing in your life? Because I know this is an interesting one for and particularly as in a couple, when you have a sport that one person does, and in your case, next at Olympic level, you come to it as more of a sort of a rookie, newbie, weekend warrior kind of skill level.
Yeah.
How was that early on? How did you guys navigate that?
It was really hard. I mean, very early on, I just didn't ski and Nick did. And then I learned to ski kind of around the time we were engaged. And this kind of first day skiing, Nick, a friend of ours taught me to ski actually, and he was brilliant. And then Nick took me up the saddle chair, and we're standing at the top of the saddle, and he's like, oh shit. And I was like, what? And he goes, I'm looking at TC through the eyes of a beginner. And I was like, I don't know what this means. And he literally piggybacked me down a mogul field. I mean, thank God I had absolutely no dignity whatsoever. My goggles fogged up with tears. I think the words were, why the fuck am I marrying you?
Yes, yeah.
But, you know, things improved from there. And when the boys were younger, you know, we'd ski as a family. I mean, they soon eclipsed me. I am, as you kind of said, I'm very much a fair weather skier. And I think early on, I in those early years, I absolutely wanted to advance. And I mean, I've got to a point where I'm comfortable that I can't ski the whole of TC. I can get around Codrona, that's great. I don't feel it needs to be part of my life now. And I think that's kind of perhaps come with maturity and a bit more confidence. Say, actually, okay, this isn't necessarily kind of what I want to do, but please go ahead and do it. You know, there's never resentment or whatever else. And I think it's such an incredible thing to be able to do when we live here. So, yeah.
It is such a massive test on a relationship, and because it is such a, you know, this is your world, and I feel so out of my depth in this world. For somebody that's coming into that and seeing your partner that's really good at this thing with all their friends who are also all really good at it, and it's so I mean, but it's like it's that initial phase that you got to get through, and then you figure stuff out.
Yeah, and at the beginning it was hugely intimidating, and as I say, my first reaction was just to block it altogether, and even then in those early years, but now I'm like, I'll go up, I have a potter, but ultimately, I can't ski powder. And those are often really beautiful bluebird days when I've far sooner be out walking.
So you had an upbringing in England, and a family and place that was very specific to that location, that culture. Your kids have experienced something different. What's the thing that you're really bummed that they haven't been able to experience that you had as a kid, and what's the thing that you didn't have as a kid that you think, oh my God, they're so fortunate having had this, or having this experience that I didn't get to have as a child because of where I grew up and my culture?
I mean, I think I was absolutely immersed in culture from the get-go, and that's not to say we went to the theatre all the time, although we did, because in those days the theatre wasn't prohibitively expensive, but just, you know, of a weekend, and this was my parents' interest, because my parents aren't, you know, we're not an athletic sporty family, you know, we didn't all go off and ski at the weekends, you know, we would go to, you know, visit a stately home, you know, and kind of do that kind of thing, or you'd go to the National Gallery or whatever it was. So it was such a wonderful upbringing, and doing that kind of thing, and just going to old churches and things like that. But I do think there's also an element of rose-tinted glasses with that. I know at the time, you know, Mum would always say that, you know, whichever one of them was with me drew the short straw in these stately homes, because they'd have to go through it at breakneck speed before I got too bored. So, but yeah, I think both the culture, but also for me the other thing is the proximity to Europe. You know, in those days, it cost nothing to drive, you know, go on the ferry and drive over to France and have a 2-week holiday in France. And I'm under no illusion now that the life I had growing up, while affordable then, would probably be absolutely prohibitive now. So those are the things that I really value with the long lens of time. I don't think I realised how amazing it was at the time, because we all know that youth is wasted on the young, and that was just what our life was. What, you know, the boys have grown up with is Wānaka. They have grown up with the outdoors. They have grown up in a blessedly safe environment. I mean, you know, I think we've always told the boys not to talk to strangers either, but, you know, there aren't that many strangers in Wānaka compared to, you know, growing up in London. So to have the outdoors, you know, when they were bored, you know, going down to the lake, feeding the eels, going to Wānaka Station Park and playing there, you know, all those things is just absolutely magic. The fact that not only do they not remember how to ski, but that they could ski. I mean, I know that there is still an element of privilege that comes with the ability to take part in a winter sport, but when you compare it to, say, skiing in the Alps, where it really is, I'd say it's considerably more expensive and exclusive to do so, you know, all those kind of things. The fact that school skiing, you know, that's part of the curriculum at primary school here, all those opportunities that, much like me taking those churches, the museums, and going to France every summer for granted, you know, they've just taken all of that for granted. And I think when they look back, as I am now, that they will realise how extraordinary that is.
It feels a little bit like writing is the third act in the play that is your life, from a professional perspective. Do you see it like that, or is this something that has been in some ways inevitable that you've been working towards, or is this more of a, oh no, actually no, this is, you know, I'll try this now?
Yeah, I mean, when I left Ripon, there was definitely an element of, oh my God, what am I going to do now? You know, I've been in wine all my professional career. I certainly didn't want to go and work with another winery. Why would I? And who would have me when I'm so kind of clearly connected to Ripon? So there was that moment of, okay, what are my skills? And, you know, I can string words together. So that seemed to be kind of where I wanted to go. And there was an amazing man, he's now dead, a historian called Keith Ovenden, whom I met through Ripon. And when I decided to leave Ripon, he was actually the one who really encouraged me to write. He's like, don't lose this. So that kind of was a bit of a light bulb moment of, maybe I could actually do this, and maybe people might want me to do stuff for them. And I'd done kind of occasional, you know, reviewing friends' websites, whatever else. So I kind of dabbled in a very, very casual, non-professional way. So I'd say it was an inevitability, in as much as that's probably my kind of key strength is writing and language. But it was like, well, what else am I going to do? So let's see how this goes.
Coming back to the question earlier around fiction or writing your own novel, whether it's fiction or based on a true story, I think there'll be plenty in there. Is that something that you, as I said, do you think will perhaps come up later on, or?
Well, so I grew up like any good teenage girl in the late 90s, and Jilly Cooper, so Sex and Horses. And my great idea when I left Ripon was that I was going to write a bonkbuster set in the world of wine. I've kind of got it mapped out. Who knows? I'd love to think that one day I might write that, but possibly more just for me than actually sending it out into the world. But look, beyond that, I'm not sure I can. You know, I read an awful lot, and I mean, actually, I was just reading a book kind of recently and just marvelling at this use of language and how they can map out this unbelievable story. And I don't actually think I can do that. Maybe the muse will hit when it comes right, but I can't yet see that for me, and I'm okay with that.
Any pieces of advice that you'd give to yourself, the Joe that was getting ready to leave the UK and head out off on this big, massive adventure, knowing now what you do now?
Don't overthink. Be present. I think that's always been a flaw of mine, is I'd spend too much time looking backwards or looking forwards and not being present. And I think that if I had mastered that earlier, things at points could have been easier.